So yeah, I'm super excited to be able to have this conversation today, just because we're living in a really exciting moment for AI in Canada right now. If you've noticed, if you've been following the news recently, like Montreal, we have Element AI, and they raised a $157 million Series A. We have AI pioneers returning to Canada to support our ecosystem, and we're sort of setting the foundation for us to be a global leader in this space. And part of that is being able to support each other and ensuring that we're lifting each other up and learning from each other in order to make sure that we're making strides in this space. So luckily we have David here, who leads data and analytics at Shopify, Canada's tech darling, and we're going to hear a little bit about how Shopify does that and perhaps how you can take those and bring them to your company. So just to get started, can you tell us any advice that you have for enterprises that are thinking about bringing AI into their technology?
Sure. It's a great question. I think the most important thing to think about is when it comes to AI, data, everyone often gets too focused on the technology of it all. It's so much more important to begin with the problems, like with business problems. Find a problem that is important to you in your business, like for your customers, for your audience, that you want to solve, that's, for which you have either data assets at your disposal or some way that you can get that. And because I've seen too many places that spend a lot of time trying to get all the data first, and they have no idea why they're doing it. Years ago, when big data was still not that big, the Yahoo team was trying to recruit me, and I remember meeting with them, and one of their engineers very proudly told me, "We are about done building the largest Oracle data warehouse on planet Earth." And I said, "Congratulations, what are you going to do with it?" And had no answer for that. And that happens quite a bit. You see people that are so focused on the technology that they lose sight of actually using it to build their business. So start with a business problem and then build your data foundations. And then just keep doing that one problem at a time. Recognize that you will be at this forever. So just build as a set of habits and competencies.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think it speaks sort of to my next question of how enterprises deal with having this large set of data and basically collecting data, and then not having anything to do with it. Do you have any advice for enterprises that are working with legacy infrastructure, that are thinking about implementing AI, but maybe don't know where to start or are nervous about it?
Sure, I think it really is the same advice. So begin with the problem. And already when the question talks about legacy technology, legacy companies, there's this implication that you have the wrong technology to get value from your data. And that is probably people who are selling you technologies. They say, "Oh, you need the fanciest, newest technology to do anything with this." Yeah. You do not. And you can get lots and lots of value, often out of techniques that have been around for a very long time. So start with the problem. Use existing tools and technology to solve it. Now, there are categories of problems that are much more inclined to use more current technology, so deep learning, computer vision type of applications. If that's what you're interested in, or that's the problem you need to go solve, then yes, you are going to need to upgrade some parts of your tech stack. But it's a common pitfall is people thinking they need to replace everything before they get any value. That's wrong.
Okay, that's really interesting, because especially in my field, I see a lot of enterprises wanting to take the startup approach and kind of be really scrappy and start all over. Do you advise companies to do that, or do you want them to think more like a startup with what they have?
I think it's just important to move quickly, one problem at a time. The longer you take and the bigger the investment you're making, with no return, the less likely this thing will succeed. And the vast majority of these things have failed for a long, long time. So I think the important part of being like a startup is to just move quickly, iterate, find specific problems to solve, either solve them or not, and then move on to another one. And if you get very good at doing that, you'll wake up one day and realize you've built this massive foundation of data assets. You've probably upgraded and replaced your technology with all the latest and greatest things, but you did so in an organic way that continued to add value all the way along.
Okay, all right, so enterprises need to stop wasting time, pretty much.
Sure, stop making excuses.
Yeah. Okay, and do you have any, on the flip side of that, do you have any advice for scrappy startups that may not necessarily have all the internal data points to build out more sophisticated solutions, how they can get started?
Yeah, I think, and this really is a key problem. One of the things that you really need to make any of these sort of data applications work is data. Lots of data. The more, the better. And if you're just starting out, you have this sort of cold start problem. How do we build these applications with none of the data? And I think that you should be resourceful and scrappy. There's a lot of different ways you could do this. You might even talk to some of the legacy companies who are here that have a lot of data but no understanding of how to go work with that. So maybe you could do that work for them and in exchange get some of that data so you both win. Then there's a lot of other sort of initiatives happening nowadays with public open data sets from government agencies, from sort of other kind of institutions. Like in the US, you have the Census Bureau. I think here you have Stats Canada. And you can use a lot of that data to build some of these applications. But again, if that's not the data needed to solve the problem that's interesting to you, then you're going to have to go find the right data somewhere.
Okay. And a lot of companies see Shopify as an example of how to build a strong company from Canada. So I feel that a lot of people would be interested to know how Shopify leverages the data that you have and how you optimize it to build your AI solutions.
Sure. So for those who don't know, Shopify is we offer a SaaS platform to make it easy for entrepreneurs to launch and build their businesses. And a natural byproduct of that work is that we accumulate a lot of data about starting, launching businesses, building businesses, all the different stages of development of a business. Now, we use that data increasingly to refine our experience. And I think of there's two key problems that I could sort of describe all the different uses of data at Shopify fall into one of two buckets. There's either wasted dollars for an entrepreneur or wasted minutes, and that's expressed in a lot of different ways. So we have an algorithms team that's focused on finding those lost dollars, whether it's wasted dollars on marketing spend, it could be losses through fraud and chargebacks. And we are building more and more solutions to find those lost dollars and lost minutes and put them back in the bucket of development for the entrepreneur. Concretely, one of the first things that we built when I moved up here was, I knew that this company, Shopify, had been accumulating these incredible data assets for a decade, but they had not really turned the corner to using data at the center of product in a continuous feedback loop to always make the platform better. So I followed my own advice. I went looking for a problem that was powerful and meaningful to our audience that would also demonstrate to the rest of the company what we could do by turning data now into an asset that sat at the center of product. And so the problem that we went to solve was order fraud. And what was good about this problem is it impacts entrepreneurs of all sizes. So from day one to infinity, everyone's always exposed to fraud. So solving this problem would be meaningful for everyone that works with Shopify. But also, we had a lot of data for this problem. So you need transactions and orders. So it was a big, important problem for our audience, and we had the data to solve it. So focusing on that, we were able to demonstrate to the company really massive gains. Probably, I think it was almost a year ago now, when we launched our first new fraud algorithm using machine learning. And we increased our accuracy of identifying real fraud by more than 10%, and reduced our false positives, which is we were maybe too trigger happy in saying they should say no to a sale too often, and we reduced that by more than 85%. And I think one thing that's important for data teams, even myself, that's something I've done differently at Shopify, is quantifying that for your company. Because if you want to drive adoption of these types of applications, you have to demystify analytics and algorithms, and it's a bit of a black box. So if you simply apply some basic assumptions to that algorithm that we shipped, in the 4-week period from mid-November to mid-December last year, the new fraud algorithm was worth $120 million and better advice to every single merchant. And what's powerful about that is it just kept going after that. So the beauty of machine learning and algorithms is they never take a break. So the massive return on investment and the leverage you get is incredible.
Okay, so I really like what you're saying about the challenge of being able to take these data sets and actually make sense out of them. That's what I got from this conversation. So
I was too wordy.
Yeah, but on that point, I feel like a huge part of that is having the team to actually be able to make sense out of all this data that you have, especially if you're working in like a large SaaS company like Shopify. So like we always get complimented, I feel, on our AI talent in Canada, and people are always talking about the strength of our AI talent. But at the same time, there is some challenges for startups to hire this talent in order to get the foundation started for building AI solutions. So can you talk about how at Shopify you attract this talent and retain them?
Oh gosh, yeah. I won't give my best tips away because then I'll lose. But I think that everyone in the space, it's not just machine learning and AI talent, and there is increasing demand for that. I just think it's always hard to recruit the best talent. And it's important to put yourself in more and more places just so you're exposed to different pools of candidates. So we do everything that we can to be in more places, give more speeches and appearances, and just be exposed to different audiences. I think, though, that oftentimes people don't recognize their win themes, their assets that they have when competing. Certainly if you're competing against really large companies, Facebook, Google, maybe Shopify, there's assets that those companies have. And it's easy to focus on compensation, that's a piece of things, but one of the biggest things that attracts data and analytics talent is data, because it's all interesting theoretical work unless you have real data to work with. And so that's why it's so important for you to find a way to build a compelling business model that's going to end up with a lot of data accumulating. You'll find it easier and easier to attract these people. But then also don't lose sight of the other big advantage is, especially the smaller you are, the earlier you are, is that you have the opportunity to offer someone the opportunity to originate something, that they're not inheriting this area, they could start it, they could be the first person to do this work. So I think that is actually something that early stage startups have a lot of advantage over bigger companies, and it almost kind of balances things out if you know how to really sell that. Very easy to, at some point, pluck people away from those very big companies because while they have massive impact in the world, the space in which any one of those folks gets to operate is a tiny fraction of an algorithm which has huge impact because they have massive traffic, but it's this tiny, tiny space. Whereas you could say, why don't you come in and take this entire area of our business and work on every problem that's there?
Yeah, for sure. So you can sell just the fulfillment that people feel.
Yeah, you're not just, people aren't just looking for money. They're looking for complex problems that nobody else has had a chance to tackle. They want data, they want support. I think it's important to, one of the things that attracted me to Shopify is the same thing that attracted me to Netflix years ago was there was this transition that was being made in the industry. And for the longest time, data projects and initiatives would be some sort of offshoot of corporate IT or some sort of group that was a cost center. And Netflix was unusual because it was part of the product group, which signaled that it was an investment. It wasn't a cost to be reduced. It was something that an investment for the company to grow. Shopify takes that even further with data at the executive table. So I think that these are all things you can use to signal to people how important this is or not to your business. But I think the best companies in the world put data at the center of their product and at the center of their company.
Right. It's good advice. So, I mean, there's a lot of hype around AI right now, and I feel that AI first is the new mobile first. Or
the new data science, or the new...
Yeah, or the new next, whatever word we want to call it. But is there any point where a company maybe shouldn't take that step towards implementing AI? Is it maybe too early, or I don't know if you can say too late, but is there a moment where a company should take a pause and not like start that?
Yeah, that's a great question. There is an order of operations here, and I've seen a lot of places get this out of order. You have to begin with that problem, and that problem is going to force you to build. If you don't have any data, you're going to need to start there. You need a data foundation, so you're going to have to define some sort of data strategy. Usually you're going to be hiring a lot of data engineers, ETL kind of people, and you're going to need that foundation in place. And once you get any of that data flowing in, you'll start moving to what people have been calling big data analytics. But this is really, now that you have this data, you start looking at it and saying, well, what does this tell me? And you start profiling your business. What does your traffic look like on a normal weekday? What does your conversion rate look like? And you can start defining signal and noise for your company. Once you have that done, you're ready to think about another capability, which in the past, people would talk a lot about predictive analytics. Now I sort of throw predictive and some of the machine learning together, because it's at this next stage where now that you know some things about how your business works and you've watched it quite a bit, you can start thinking about supervised model building. Well, the supervision often comes from the things that you learned in the earlier step. So you really have to think of it as at the right moment, you start adding capabilities and adding this to your group. You never stop doing the things you were doing before. That's always there. But you start layering in these capabilities at the right time. Some teams, because they get so focused on things like AI and machine learning, that'll be the first person they hire. And if you haven't done any of this stuff, they're going to arrive and say, I'm all ready to build this great data application. Where's the data? And if you don't have it, you are going to just have an incredibly expensive person that's not building you very much.
Okay, so say you've hired this person, you've got a whole wealth of data for them, and they're ready to start working. But on another side of that, working with this data that is coming from users, how do we keep the user's privacy in mind when we're working with this data? It seems like every other day we're hearing about a new breach, or from whether it's Uber or like a financial institution like Equifax. Cybersecurity, it's a panel in and of itself, but it's something that we need to be thinking about. So how can companies get ahead of that and ensure that they're protecting their users?
That's a great question. I think it starts with simply making sure that conversation is happening within your company. And I know that at Shopify, we take privacy and security of our merchants and their customers' data very, very seriously. And so within the data teams, we look to implement techniques like we make sure that we're working to encrypt data whenever possible so that you maintain all the analytical value, but you're not seeing actually who that is. And a lot of analytics teams don't even need that. I'm not interested in looking or analyzing the patterns of David Lennie of the world. It's usually like large sets of populations. And so there's really no reason you can't even tokenize all of that private information and still maintain all of the analytical integrity, but you've also now sort of insulated yourselves and your teams from having to be worried about sort of inadvertently seeing something that you didn't even want to see in the first place or need to see. So I think that companies, if you're not doing that, you need to start that conversation. And this is where probably there's more risk for legacy companies, because if you didn't have these standards and patterns for a long time, then you have lots and lots of systems that didn't have these standards and patterns for a long time. You're going to have to go back and do that harder work of retrofitting that.
Okay, so going back to the more technical side of it, for a company that's building out their AI solution, how do they figure out their priorities? And is it better to make it part of the product development or to run it as experiments?
Both. I think that you need to develop the habit of test and learn. I don't think that is unique to any one area. And if you get into the sort of cycle that people just know you want to move quickly, test things out, get the signal back, and then promote what worked, sort of take out anything that didn't, I think you could do that in any team, not just product development, and that it should be absolutely part of product. That goes back to putting data at the heart of what your company is doing, as opposed to just sort of information that describes what your company has been doing, which is where a lot of people sort of treat it as reporting. And you have to turn that corner from data warehousing to building data refineries. So figure out how to build a feedback loop that now takes the things you've been learning and studying and injects it continuously back into your product experience. If you do that, that's when the sort of light bulb will go off for your company culturally.
Okay, yeah, just because you're making it the heart of
right.
everything you do. Okay. So I'd like to get into a little bit of a bigger question on building out an AI solution and sort of the ethics of building an AI solution in your company. So, AI is often lauded as this highly logical solution that's going to revolutionize areas such as tenant screening or job applicant screening. But if we're working with data sets that are often coming from like timeframes when there was certain social conflicts. So for some context, I hosted a panel on this topic at BetaKit 150, which was our event celebrating Canada's 150th birthday. And one of the panelists I spoke to, Shiva Mary, who is running a AI healthcare company, said that it can be difficult to find out whether medication works or work with certain data when all the data sets are white men, because maybe at a certain time that was like the preferred sample size. So with that, how can we sort of avoid this, the human bias part of building out AI? Because inevitably we're going to find that our biases are going to come from AI.
I think this is one of the most important questions and really more cutting edge. that, and like anything else, I don't think you can rely fully on technology for this. It has to begin with the conversation. So within my teams, when we think about the algorithms that we're building, start thinking about the output of this. What is this being used for? And one of the things we think the most about is, will the output of this recommendation or the score we're going to produce, does it open or close a door for somebody? Does it give them an opportunity or does it take it away? And I think that's a good starting point. And we use that to sort of screen even more directly. Are we injecting bias into this in a way that we didn't expect? Because you're right, that machine learning and AI is nothing more than technology that people are writing. And we have really not gotten to this level where it's sort of sentient and coming up with its own idea. There's some elements where things have trained themselves a little bit, but that makes for good press, but it's mostly overblown. The real risk and concern is the bias and sort of blind spots that we all already have. And that will absolutely get coded into these algorithms right now if people aren't watching out for it and thinking about ways to check for it.
For sure. So, but startups are moving so fast. How do you, does there need to be more education in this area just from other sources? Or how do we make people care about something like that?
I mean, I think this is a very good first step. And I will admit, I don't have all the answers right now. It's something that I'm very passionate about. Yeah. And that's why my teams have been having this discussion a lot. One of my favorite hack days that we did within Shopify, and usually people want to build interesting new apps, that one of my teams on their own decided to pick up this topic to research the cutting edge thinking and how do you detect and control for bias or think about things like morality and ethics in your algorithms. And incredibly legal and very ostensibly dry, but they all were very passionate about doing this. And I think that is such an important first step, because if you're waiting for somebody technically to solve this, we will probably be waiting for a long time, all the while the machine learning that it could either be a power of mass construction, could also be a power of mass destruction for people who are having doors closed for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear this a lot. It's kind of the challenge of just because we can doesn't mean that we should, especially because technology is moving faster than any of us can comprehend. Yep. So we're getting close to the end of our panel, so going to end on a bit of a lighter note.
Great.
Yeah, so how do you know when someone is actually using AI? How can a company sort of differentiate themselves from the companies that say we're using AI, but maybe they're over-exaggerating a little bit? Everybody's
over-exaggerating. Yeah, it's mostly a bunch of talk. It reminds me of when people started talking about big data, usually the people who talked about it the most were the ones who had it the least. Yeah. So I think that's always going to be a cycle that we go through. I don't think the right goal is to want to make a name for yourself with the technology. I think the better goal is to build a great business and solve problems one at a time for your audience and your customers in a meaningful way. If you're doing that using this technology, you will become known as a company that does great work with AI and machine learning. So that should not be the goal. That's probably the outcome of every day solving problems in a high-scale way for your audience. But the people who want to be known for AI but don't do any of that other stuff will probably fail.
Okay, good to know. That's a comfort. Anyway, so we're at the end of our panel. So can I get a round of applause for David for taking the time to talk to us about this? Of course. Yeah, and I'm sure you'll be around.
I will be around, yes.
Yeah, to take any other of your burning AI questions.
Right. Thank you.